Hey there, you are listening to the Chapter 28 abbreviated version of To Kill a Mockingbird. We are going to be summarizing the first part of this chapter and then reading the rest of the chapter starting from page 348. Now, at the beginning of this chapter, we see that Jem and Scout are heading to the high school. They're having this Halloween pageant there. And on their way to the pageant, to the school, we have one of Scout's classmates pop out and scare them. His name is Cecil Jacobs. We've met him earlier in the story. So they get a good fright out of this. They head to the school. They play some games, and then it's time for the pageant itself. And Scout is in this ridiculous ham costume, and so what she ends up doing is she's waiting backstage, and Mrs. Merriweather, who's in charge of this whole production, is droning on and on about Colonel Maycomb for 30 minutes, and Scout realizes that if she sits correctly in her costume, she could kind of like prop herself up in a way that allows her to, fall asleep. And so she falls asleep. And she's supposed to run on stage when Mrs. Merriweather says, pork. And so her part comes. Mrs. Merriweather yells, pork. But unfortunately, Scout is asleep. And so Mrs. Merriweather calls for her 3 times, and Scout misses her cue. Until the end of the play, when they're singing kind of the final song, and Scout realizes that she's missed her cue, runs on stage, and everybody in the audience starts cracking up. Now, this is entertaining. Most of the people were bored out of their mind watching this play, so it's a nice, refreshing surprise there. However, Mrs. Merriweather, being, not a nice lady, tells Scout that she has ruined the production, and Scout feels so sad and ashamed that she doesn't want anybody to see her face. So she makes Jem wait with her until everybody clears out of the school, and then they're walking home together. But couple things worth noting, nobody's around because they waited until everybody cleared out, and we see that it's a very dark night. All right, so that's where we're going to leave off. Go ahead and turn to page 348 to follow along with our reading. Let's go ahead and get started. Here, Scout, let me hold on to your hock. You might lose your balance. I can see all right. Yeah, but you might lose your balance. I felt a slight pressure on my head and assumed that Jem had grabbed that end of the ham. You got me? Uh-huh. We began crossing the black schoolyard, straining to see our feet. Jem, I said, I forgot my shoes. They're back behind the stage. Well, let's go get 'em. But as we turned around, the auditorium lights went off. You can get 'em tomorrow, he said. But tomorrow's Sunday, I protested, as Jem turned me homeward. You can get the janitor to let you in. Scout? Nothing. Jem hadn't started that in a long time. I wondered what he was thinking. He'd tell me when he wanted to, probably when we got home. I felt his fingers press the top of my costume. Too hard, it seemed. I shook my head. Jem, you don't have to. Hush a minute, Scout, he said, pinching me. We walked along silently. Minute's up, I said. What you thinking about? I turned to look at him, but his outline was barely visible. Thought I heard something, he said. Stop a minute. We stopped. Hear anything? He asked. No. We had not gone 5 paces before he made me stop again. Quick pause here. We see that Jem clearly thinks he's hearing something and is a little bit freaked out by this. He's grabbing the top of Scout's costume and he keeps making her stop. So we're on the top of page 349. Jem, are you trying to scare me? You know I'm too old. Be quiet, he said, and I knew he was not joking. The night was still. I could hear his breath coming easily beside me. Occasionally there was a sudden breeze that hit my bare legs, but it was all that remained of a promised windy night. This was the stillness before a thunderstorm. We listened. Heard an old dog just then, I said. It's not that, Jem answered. I hear it when we're walking along, but when we stop, I don't hear it. You hear my costume rustling. It's just Halloween got ya. I said it more to convince myself than Jem, for sure enough, as we began walking, I heard what he was talking about. It was not my costume. It's just old Cecil, said Jem presently. He won't get us again. Let's don't let him think we're hurrying. We slowed to a crawl. I asked Jem how Cecil could follow us in the dark. Looked to me like he'd bump into us from behind. I can see you, Scout, Jem said. How? I can't see you. Your fat streaks are showing. Mrs. Crenshaw painted 'em with some of that shiny stuff so they'd show up under the footlights. I can see you pretty well, and I expect Cecil can see you well enough to keep his distance. I would show Cecil that we knew he was behind us and we were ready for him. Cecil Jacobs is a big wet hen, I yelled, suddenly turning around. We stopped. There was no acknowledgement save hen bouncing off the distant schoolhouse wall. I'll get 'em, said Jem. Hey, 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 answered the schoolhouse wall. It was unlike Cecil to hold out for so long. Once he pulled a joke, he'd repeat it time and again. We should have been leapt at already. Jem signaled for me to stop again. He said softly, Scout, can you take that thing off? I think so, but I ain't got anything on under it much. I've got your dress here. I can't get it on in the dark. Okay, he said, never mind. Jem, are you afraid? No. Think we're almost to the tree now. Few yards from that and we'll be to the road. We can see the street light then. Jem was talking in an unhurried, flat, toneless voice. I wondered how long he would try to keep the Cecil myth going. Quick pause here. So Scout is starting to realize that Jem is trying to say, oh, maybe it's Cecil to make her feel better. So both Jem and Scout realize that it's not Cecil following them, that it's apparently somebody else who's walking behind them. And Jem is clearly freaked out, but he's trying to keep his composure so as to not scare Scout. All right, let's keep reading on page 350. You reckon we ought to sing, Jem? No, be real quiet again, Scout. We had not increased our pace. Jem knew as well as I that it was difficult to walk fast without stumping a toe, tripping on stones, and other inconveniences, and I was barefooted. Maybe it was the wind rustling the trees, but there wasn't any wind, and there weren't any trees except the big oak. Our company shuffled and dragged his feet as if wearing heavy boots. Whoever it was wore thick cotton pants. What I thought were trees rustling was the soft swish of cotton on cotton, weak, with every step. I felt the sand go cold under my feet, and I knew we were near the big oak. Jem pressed my head. We stopped and listened. Shufflefoot had not stopped with us this time. His trousers swished softly and steadily. They stopped. He was running towards us with no child's step. Run, Scout, run, run! Jem screamed. I took one giant step and found myself reeling, my arms useless in the dark. I could not keep my balance. Jem, help me, Jem! Something crushed the chicken wire around me. Metal ripped on metal, and I fell to the ground and rolled as far as I could, floundering to escape my wire prison. From somewhere nearby came scuffling, kicking sounds of shoes and flesh scraping dirt and roots. Someone rolled against me, and I felt Jem. He was up like lightning and pulling me with him, but though my head and shoulders were free, I was so entangled we didn't get very far. We were nearly to the road when I felt Jem's hand leave me, felt him jerk backwards to the ground, more scuffling, and there came a dull crunching sound, and Jem screamed. All right, quick pause here. So clearly they weren't mistaken in hearing someone following them, and this person now is attacking them and trying to grab them. Scout, unfortunately, is still in her costume, so it makes it very difficult to move, and the costume gets all crunched up when she's on the ground, so they don't get very far. Jem tries to grab Scout's hand and run with her towards the street, but then she feels Jem yanked away from her, and she hears a dull crunching sound, which most likely indicates like some sort of broken bone. All right, let's keep reading on page 351. I ran in the direction of Jem's scream and sank into a flabby male stomach. Its owner said, "Oof," and tried to catch my arms, but they were tightly pinioned. His stomach was soft, but his arms were like steel. He slowly squeezed the breath out of me. I could not move. Suddenly, he was jerked backwards and flung on the ground, almost carrying me with him. I thought, Jem's up. One's mind works very slowly at times. Stunned, I stood there dumbly. The scuffing noises were dying. Someone wheezed, and the night was still again. Still, but for a man breathing heavily and staggering. I thought he went to the tree and leaned against it. He coughed violently, a sobbing, bone-shaking cough. So quick pause here. There is another person that comes onto the scene. So we have the attacker who tries to pretty much strangle Scout and choke the breath out of her. And then someone else comes who Scout doesn't know and rips the man away from Scout. And then the scuffling stops. However, now she hears the other man that came onto the scene breathing very heavily by the tree. All right, let's continue on the top of page 352. Jem. There was no answer but the man's heavy breathing. Jem. Jem didn't answer. The man began moving around as if searching for something. I heard him groan and pull something heavy along the ground. It was slowly coming to me that there were now 4 people under the tree. Atticus? The man was walking heavily and unsteadily toward the road. I went to where I thought he had been and felt frantically along the ground, reaching out with my toes. Presently, I touched someone. Jem? My toes touched trousers, a belt buckle, buttons, something I could not identify, a collar, and a face. A prickly stubble on the face told me it was not Jem's. I smelled stale whiskey. All right, so quick pause here. Clearly, there's 4 people under the tree. We know 2 of them are Jem and Scout. We can make the assumption that Jem most likely is passed out here because he's not responding to Scout. We see that there's a man heavily wheezing and he's searching for something on the ground. And then we see that another man seems to be passed out on the ground, or at least unconscious on the ground. All right, let's get back to reading. I made my way along in what I thought was the direction of the road. I was not sure because I had been turned around so many times, but I found it and looked down to the street light. A man was passing under it. The man was walking with the staccato steps of somebody carrying a load too heavy for him. He was going around the corner. He was carrying Jem. Jem's arm was dangling crazily in front of him. By the time I reached the corner, the man was crossing our front yard. Light from our front door framed Atticus for an instant. He ran down the steps, and together he and the man took Jem inside. I was at the front door when they were going down the hall. Aunt Alexandra was running to me. Call Dr. Reynolds. Atticus's voice came sharply from Jem's room. Where's Scout? Here she is, Aunt Alexandra called, pulling me along with her to the telephone. She tugged at me anxiously. I'm all right, Auntie, I said. You better call. She pulled the receiver from the hook and said, Eula May, get Dr. Reynolds, quick. Agnes, is your father home? Oh, God, where is he? Please tell him to come over here as soon as he comes in. Please, it's urgent. There was no need for Aunt Alexandra to identify herself. People in Maycomb knew each other's voices. Atticus came out of Jem's room. The moment Aunt Alexandra broke the connection, Atticus took the receiver from her. He rattled the hook, then said, Eula May, get me the sheriff, please. Heck, Atticus Finch, someone's been after my children. Jem's hurt. Between here and the schoolhouse. I can't leave my boy. Run out there for me, please, and see if he's still around. Doubt if you'll find him now, but I'd like to see him if you do. Gotta go now. Thanks, Heck. Atticus, is Jem dead? No, Scout. Look after her, sister, he called, as he went down the hall. Aunt Alexandra's fingers trembled as she unwound the crushed fabric and wire around me. Are you all right, darling? She asked over and over as she worked me free. It was a relief to be out. My arms were beginning to tingle, and they were red with small hexagonal marks. I rubbed them, and they felt better. Auntie, is Jem dead? No, no, darling. He's unconscious. We won't know how badly he's hurt until Dr. Reynolds gets here. Jean Louise, what happened? I don't know. She left it at that. She brought me something to put on, and had I thought about it then, I would have never let her forget it. In her distraction, Auntie brought me my overalls. Put these on, darling, she said, handing me the garment she most despised. She rushed back to Jem's room, then came to me in the hall. She patted me vaguely and went back to Jem's room. quick pause here. So we see that the man that came picks Jem up and carries him across the street, and his arm is dangling wildly, and clearly he has most likely broken his arm at the elbow, which we know is what they're trying to remember at the very beginning of the story. And we also see that once they get in the house, they're trying to call both the doctor and Sheriff Hectate, and we see that Aunt Alexandra is being really gentle with Scout and even brings her overalls here in an attempt to comfort her. At this point, we still don't know who attacked the children, and we don't know who is the man carrying Jem across the street back to the house. All right, let's get back to reading on page 354. A car stopped in front of the house. I knew Dr. Reynolds' step almost as well as my father's. He brought Jem and me into the world, had led us through every childhood disease known to man, including the time Jem fell out of the treehouse, and he had never lost our friendship. Dr. Reynolds said if we had been boil-prone, things would have been different, but we doubted it. He came in the front door and said, "Good Lord." He walked toward me and said, "You're still standing," and changed his course. He knew every room in the house. He also knew that if I was in bad shape, so was Jem. After 10 forevers, Dr. Reynolds returned. "Is Jem dead?" I asked. "Far from it," he said, squatting down to me. "He's got a bump on the head just like yours and a broken arm. Scout, look that way. No, don't turn your head. Roll your eyes. Now look over yonder. He's got a bad break so far, as I can tell. Now it's in the elbow, like somebody tried to wring his arm off. Now look at me." "Then he's not dead." "No." Dr. Reynolds got to his feet. "We can't do much tonight," he said, "except try to make him as comfortable as we can. We'll have to x-ray his arm. Looks like he'll be wearing his arm way out to the side for a while. Don't worry, though. He'll be as good as new. Boys his age bounce." While he was talking, Dr. Reynolds had been looking keenly at me, lightly fingering the bump that was coming on my forehead. "You don't feel broke anywhere, do you?" Dr. Reynolds' small joke made me smile. "Then you don't think he's dead, then?" He put on his hat. "Now, I may be wrong, of course, but I think he's very alive. Shows all symptoms of it. Go have a look at him. And when I come back, we'll get together and decide." Dr. Reynolds' step was young and brisk. Mr. Hectate's was not. His heavy boots punished the porch, and he opened the door awkwardly. But he said the same thing Dr. Reynolds said when he came in. "You all right, Scout?" he added. "Yes, sir. I'm going in to see Jem. Atticus and them's in there." "I'll go with you," said Mr. Tate. Aunt Alexandra had shaded Jem's reading light with a towel, and his room was dim. Jem was lying on his back. There was an ugly mark along one side of his face. His left arm lay out from his body. His elbow was bent slightly, but in the wrong direction. Jem was frowning. "Jem?" Atticus spoke. "He can't hear you, Scout. He's out like a light. He was coming around, but Dr. Reynolds put him out again." "Yes, sir." I retreated. Jem's room was large and square. Aunt Alexandra was sitting in a rocking chair by the fireplace. The man who brought Jem in was standing in the corner, leaning against the wall. He was some countryman I did not know. He had probably been at the pageant and was in the vicinity when it happened. He must have heard our screams and came running. Atticus was standing by Jem's bed. Mr. Hectate stood in the doorway. His hat was in his hand, and a flashlight bulged from his pants pocket. He was in his work clothes. "Come in, Heck," said Atticus. "Did you find anything? I can't conceive of anyone low down enough to do a thing like this, but I hope you found him." Mr. Tate sniffed. He glanced sharply at the man in the corner, nodded to him, then looked around the room, at Jem, at Aunt Alexandra, then at Atticus. "Sit down, please, Mr. Finch," he said pleasantly. Atticus said, "Let's all sit down. Have that chair, Heck. I'll get another one from the living room." Mr. Tate sat in Jem's desk chair. He waited until Atticus returned and settled himself. I wondered why Atticus had not brought a chair for the man in the corner, but Atticus knew the way of country people far better than I. Some of his rural clients would park their long-eared steeds under the chinaberry trees in the backyard, and Atticus would often keep appointments on the back steps. This one was probably more comfortable where he was. "Mr. Finch," said Mr. Tate, Tell you what I found. I found a little girl's dress. It's out there in my car. That your dress, Scout?" "Yes, sir, if it's a pink one with smocking," I said. Mr. Tate was behaving as if he were on the witness stand. He liked to tell things his own way, untrammeled by state or defense, and sometimes it took him a while. "I found some funny-looking pieces of muddy-colored cloth. That's my costume, Mr. Tate." Mr. Tate ran his hands down his thighs. He rubbed his left arm and investigated Jem's mantelpiece. Then he seemed to be interested in the fireplace. His fingers sought his long nose. "What is it, Heck?" said Atticus. Mr. Tate found his neck and rubbed it. "Bob Yule's lying on the ground under that tree yonder, with a kitchen knife stuck up under his ribs. He's dead, Mr. Finch." All right, quite a way to end the chapter. We find out here that Bob Yule is lying under the tree dead, so most likely he was the one who attacked the children here. A couple things we still don't know. Scout does not recognize the man that came and carried Jem across the street. We also don't know who's responsible for killing Bob Yule here. Was it Jem when he was scuffling with him? Was it this man who showed up on the scene? We just don't know. So make sure we're reading the last 3 chapters to figure out what's going on here. That is the end of chapter 28. If you have any questions, make sure you're reaching out to your teacher.